for it to burn a certain length of time before it went off. And so all that stuff was in that kit right there. Judy's going to take a picture of it there in her camera. It's all handmade tools. They're nickel plated. And the calculator strip there that has all the information on it is made of ivory. It looks like plastic, but it's ivory. And a retired school teacher in California gave that to me during World War II in Los Angeles, California. And she didn't have anybody that she could give it to at the time, so she gave it to me. She says, "This is very important. I'd like you to take care of it."
And with further ado, because we didn't do it last time, let me introduce Mike Kuzara, our speaker. What's your program on, Mike?
My program is on the Shurly Skirmish on Prairie Dog Creek.
If anybody owes dues, I call.
Oh, and Mona collects dues, by the way, just in case you feel a little flush there.
Any donations.
Or donations, yes.
Give me money.
So, well, there's been some noise about this particular incident, and for years, some of the historians, including Glenn Sweem, were looking for the site of this fight, which was reported to be on Goose Creek. And some of the official documents actually state that this happened on Goose Creek. And so everybody was looking in the wrong place. And Glenn was at some friends he was visiting over in Manchester, Dayton, and he saw an old wall hanger rifle and asked where they got it. And they said that this came from some homestead, some bachelor brothers, that they knew that lived on Prairie Dog Creek. So Glenn, being the kind of investigator that he was, went there to find out how these guys came up with this old Civil War era piece of hardware. And they said, well, when we moved in here to homestead this place, we found all this junk in the brush, and we just stuck it in the barn. And Glenn says, my gosh, this is where that darn fight took place. It didn't take place on Goose Creek, it happened on Prairie Dog Creek. And so here's the tale on that. These guys took off from Fort C.F. Smith, and the report is a little sketchy because it doesn't explain exactly how these guys got where they went. I'll explain that. And that this official letter is, and in my report, is combined with other documents, some information I've gleaned from Brian Cockle of the Montana State, he's a Montana State archivist, and other things that Glenn found. So it's a combination of all this information that's thrown into this report that explains what happened there. And Shurly says he was tasked to escort an empty wagon train from Fort C.F. Smith to Fort Phil Kearny. And he left up there with 40 men. And the 40 men were with the 27th U.S. Infantry. And as we know, the infantry wasn't treated to any luxury during that time, as evidenced by the foot soldiers that had to run alongside of the cavalry horses chasing the Indians to the site of the Fetterman Massacre. So if you were in infantry, you weren't expected to ride a horse, you had to walk. And these guys walked from Fort C.F. Smith, as far as I know. It's 104 miles to almost to Fort Phil Kearny, escorting these empty wagons that belonged to Wells Fargo Company, pulled by oxen. Here's the other thing that's not evident to people who are not cognizant of how this works. If you're pulling wagons with horses or mules, they've got a britchin on there, which keeps the wagon from running into the animals. Oxen just pull wagons. They don't stop them. If you're going downhill, the wagon will run over the oxen because the oxen don't trot. All they do is walk. And so they're incredibly slow. And so if you're going downhill, the soldiers that are accompanying this thing have to hold the wagon back with ropes or drag a log. It's a really tedious, painful process to go anywhere this way, but that's the way they did it. I think the only reason that you could explain why they like to use oxen was that if things got really tough, you could eat them, and it wasn't quite like eating a horse. So they were probably pretty stringy, because I've eaten a longhorn before. It was driven a long ways, and the bottom of my boot would have been a lot better digestible than that steer was, that's for sure. So, anyway, these guys took off in late October, and by, he says they took the good road, and it was not he said in one point it was the old road, because Colonel Carrington had engineered or surveyed what was called the new road, or the military cutoff. So when you leave Fort Phil Kearny, you ride along the base of the mountains, that's the new road, but that was not for wagons, it's too rough. And that's what Shurly explains in his letter to General Brisbane in 1888, when he was explaining the circumstances of all this, how this occurred. And he said we took the old road because it was much smoother and easier to travel. So they reached a point where, in his description, as we approached and encamped Corral, they were firing their howitzer at the Indians who were on the hilltops, and they hurried. These 40 guys. Now, how could 40 guys hurry a bunch of oxen pulling about wagons? I don't know. But they hurried up there, and about the time they got there, another bunch of soldiers from Fort Phil Kearny rode in, the cavalry this time, hurried the firing, and ran the Indians off from this corral. They said they could see the Fetterman Hill from their camp spot. And if you know the lay of land over there, you know that the spot that they corralled in was the spot that everybody was told to corral in, which was right where Larry Durante lives now, and is also the site of French Beach Trading Post. And the reason that they corralled there rather than by the fort, which you think, but if I've got a wagon train or a cattle herd, I don't want to be by the fort, because it's safer. The people at the fort don't think so, because if you bring all your animals in there, you're eating their gas station. You've got to camp someplace a long ways away so you're not eating up all their grass. So anyway, they rode up there that night, and it was November 2nd, 1867. Shurly's orders were to take over the train that was headed north. It was a loaded freight train, and turn over the empty wagons to the people that he just met. And when they went to depart then, the commander of the guy that was escorting the wagon train said, "You better take my little cannon with you, because these Indians are still up here on the bluffs and they're kind of keeping an eye on everything." And probably the only reason they didn't attempt to attack the empty wagons because the wagons were empty. So these guys encountered a pretty hefty snowstorm that slowed them down considerable when they left the next morning, and they had one more camp, and then they got to this point where they were. And let's see, what do we got there on the slideshow?
Okay, this is Shurly.
Yeah, that's Mr. Shurly right there, S-H-U-R-L-Y. That's the letter, that's one of the letters that he wrote. And there is Fort Phil Kearny, and you get a lay of the land. If you stay to the, I found somebody's cane. Oh, how handy! If you stay over here to the left, you're on the new road, which is rougher. The route that they took was down over here, following Prairie Dog Creek, on over here into this area, and it was a smoother go. I don't know whose cane that is, but that's pretty handy.
It's mine and you can use it.
Okay. Anyway, when we got into that area, I think maybe the next slide has demonstration there of where Shurly was. Let's see, what do we got?
The conical hills that you were showing me are down by the north arrow.
Okay, let's
And then the
see.
Shurly side is up towards the north.
It's Prairie Dog Shurly fight. Okay, up in here, there's a hill.
I can
It's-
get closer, Mike. Let me
It's
get you the
fine,
next
it
one.
runs down, oh,
Want that
there
one?
we go. Ah, that's the one I wanted right there. I'll try to stay out of your way here. This hill extended further on out, and you can see an old oxbow in the Google Earth picture here. The creek went over there and cut a big cut bank out of the side of that hill. So when these guys were going along this way over here, this is pretty smooth, and they come to this area, they couldn't get across, and they couldn't cross Prairie Dog Creek with wagons there. So Glenn Swaim showed me where they cut away, and you could see the wagon tracks at that time that went up here and came back down almost where the Cat Creek Road is. And the Indians were kind of watching this, keeping an eye on things. This was a 26 wagon freight train that was belonged to Wells Fargo and is full of all kinds of neat stuff for the people at Fort C.F. Smith. And the cannon and its lister, which is your cannon, your little wagon that you pull along with the cannon, pulled by a team of mules and usually accompanied by about 6 men, was at the end of the train. They had the little cannon with them, and they had mules, and they also had mules pulling the ammunition wagon. This is significant, and I'll come to that here in a minute. So the Indians watched them help the wagons down the hill and then go across Prairie Dog Creek, because there was a crossing there, over onto the flats on the other side and start to corral up. At about the time there was only 3 wagons left, the Indians attacked. And what happened, Shurly doesn't say for sure. He didn't say the soldier abandoned. He just says the soldier that was with the ammunition wagon wasn't there. So he didn't want to cause trouble for the guy, saying he abandoned it when the Indians attacked. But the mules took off with their ammo wagon. Had their cannon shells and their soldiers' bullets in the wagon. It just took off, went through the Indians. And fortunately, the lister that was pulled with the cannon had 6 shells with it. And I'll say this, when the whole fight ended, another day later, because they had a 2-day fight, they had 2 shells left for the cannon, and each soldier had about 4 rounds left. So this is pretty close. Now, Shurly speculates in here also that since every man that was with the cannon was wounded, some very severely, the Indians were trying really hard to get their hands on that thing. And they had one heck of a fight to keep the Indians away from it and get that cannon back into the enclosure. Shurly was wounded in this engagement. He and one Indian, he describes the fight, was on, the Indians on one side of the wagon with 2 other Indians, and he was on the other side. So like I said in my report, they could have reached across and shook hands if they were so inclined to do so, but I don't think so. Anyway, if you can imagine yourself being by one of those wagons and there's somebody on the other side, the Indian saw Shurly's foot and fired an arrow into the instep, and the point came out the bottom of his boot. Then the Indian popped around the end of the wagon. And Shurly says, in there, he said, I had this old-fashioned pistol. And then later on he called it a horse pistol. And I looked that up in the common terminology in there. This was a .454 Dragoon Colt. It weighed 4.5 pounds. It used a 45 caliber slug with 60 pounds, 60 grains of black powder. So when this Indian popped around the wagon, Shurly shot him with his old-fashioned pistol. I don't have an idea that range, that it not only put a hole in the guy, it probably tore him in half. And Shurly mentioned later on, he says, in his report, he says, I still have this pistol and I shoot it occasionally, it's like a cannon. So, I can imagine it was probably a Dragoon Colt. Anyway, 2 other Indians that were there were going to try to get the best of him, and they were cut down by fire from the troopers over there. Now keep in mind that the foot soldiers all had those trapdoor 45-70 rifles, the same ones that were used at the wagon box more than likely. And they were pretty long range, and they were able to bring down these other 2 Indians and keep them off of Shurly's back while he helped the driver of the wagon down off the hill. I mean, he's wounded in the foot, and this other guy is wounded too, and he helps him down the hill. They had to abandon the wagons and go down into the circle, and the Indians gathered for a charge. And that's where cannon came in. They must have had somebody on there that knew how to fire that thing, because he fired an aerial burst over this group of Indians who was going to charge the circle. And it scattered them pretty good. Later on, the Indians tried to form another charge, and they ran them off with the cannon. So then it was a standoff. The Indians couldn't get close because the infantry guys had these long-range rifles, but they were short of ammo. And Shurly warned his men. He said, anybody that shoots unnecessarily, I will shoot. So they were saving their bullets. The Indians knew they couldn't get any closer except to sneak down in the bushes. And here's the other thing they did to help these guys out. They got down into the bushes along the creek, and then they start lobbing arrows into the compound. And you might think, well, you know, there's hold of something over my head or something like that. But the livestock didn't have that luxury. So here you have a bunch of guys trying to control the livestock that are being arrowed. There's probably a lot of pandemonium going on in there. And Shurly mentioned that there were some broken hips and stuff like that in there. And I have no idea that a lot of these guys got either crushed up against a wagon or trampled or anything else in there with these arrows coming down. They managed to hold off the Indians. And after darkness fell, Shurly says they had 2 horses that were still good. And 2 volunteers took off and rode up this draw. And I don't know if this shows that gully right across there that goes up. They probably snuck up that gully and rode back to Fort Phil Kearny for help. The odd part about this whole thing is that during that fight that happened during that day, there was another contingent of cavalry riding along the new road from Fort C.F. Smith to Fort Phil Kearny on an inspection tour. And they heard some gunfire, and the commander said, well, it's probably just the people hunting, and they just kept riding. So when the soldiers that managed to come out of the Shurly's Corral got to Fort Phil Kearny and alerted the troops there, they sent these same cavalry had ridden 104 miles. I don't know if they were in a hurry or not, but their horses were worn out, but they went ahead and trotted on down. They couldn't gallop. This isn't one of those things. And Shurly said when they came galloping on down, you got to keep in mind, Fort Phil Kearny at that time had a lot of infantry, but they were short of horses for one reason or another. And they were very glad to see the troops from Fort Phil Kearny come down and run the Indians off. And so when this happened, like I say, they had 2 rounds left for the cannon, and each soldier had about 4 rounds left. The odd thing about this whole thing is that these guys that were driving the oxen, they didn't sit up on the wagons. They walked beside them with a goad and kept them going. He said very few of the wagon drivers had firearms. And when the Indians ran off the wagon, it had all the ammunition for their weapons anyway. So the Indians could have run that outfit over had they known, but when the soldiers fired that cannon a couple times, the Indians had no way of knowing that that's just about all the rounds they had for that thing. So they had to use all their resources judiciously. Later on in time, Shurly's compadres in the Army tried to get a commendation for him for the way that he handled the situation and kept everybody alive during that whole thing. But he was turned down, and basically it was the Army felt that in light of the Custer battle and the wagon box and everything else, it was just insignificant. It was like business as usual. But these guys, as far as I'm concerned, if you look at the scope of this thing, they fought for 2 days. They were in there overnight. And he Shurly estimated there were about 700 Indians there swarming all over the hills. This is a pretty significant engagement, and the guy didn't get any recognition. There's not even a sign by the road out there or anything that says this is where this happened, because the reason we didn't know about it either is because the Wyoming Highway Department came in and rearranged the whole landscape. They rerouted Prairie Dog Creek, chopped off part of the hill and built a highway through there, put in a bridge and everything else. You never know, that was a battleground.
Mike, I put that picture up for you. These
Yeah.
these next few slides were from Glenn Sweem's collection.
Pardon?
These next few slides are from Glenn Sweem's collection.
Yeah, those slides are. And then if you go to the next one, I don't know if that's got any significance there. Yeah, that's Glenn Sweem's. After he did the research on that, determined, and when I took the tour with Glenn, you could actually, if you were at the right time of the year, you could see those wagon tracks up over that knob and back down the hill to where they came out and crossed Prairie Dog Creek. I might explain in case nobody knows or not aware. Clear back in the 50s, Glenn and Mark Badgett flew the Bozeman Trail and were able to see it from the air, where it went in and out of cultivated ground and everything else, and you couldn't follow it on the ground unless you knew where it was when you came out the other end of some developed area. And in some of the highway construction actually overlaid that Bozeman Trail. They walked the whole thing. They loaded up a pack mule and they walked that whole Bozeman Trail. So Glenn knew where the wagon road was. And by the artifacts they found that it dribbled off the wagons as they went along, they found all kinds of junk. And that's the only reason that we know where the trail went. In Glenn's archives, there should be some of that stuff left to where the people that want to make this, what is that? Bozeman Trail historical project that's...
Yeah, they're putting it on the National Register.
National Register of Historic Places.
Historic Trails.
Historic trails.
So...
This is another, just an overview of what Glenn put together.
There's more drawings of that. But if you go out there today, you won't see anything that's obvious that was the battle site or anything else. And the thing that I want to do is to get somebody, I know somebody that's got a very good metal detector, and go out there on the hills that surround that area and see what artifacts can be found, and find some of the ammunition, bullets or anything else that would indicate the direction that they came from. One could backtrack on those trajectories back and see where this corral was. Shurly also mentioned that they, when they were ready to leave after they were rescued, that they picked up a wagon load of arrows. So this would mean that they didn't want to leave them there for the Indians to use again, so they picked up the arrows and took them with them. Now, as far as the cannon is concerned, case you're wondering how that thing works, there it is. There's your cannonball with a little package on the end. It's called a sabot, S-A-B-O-T. And it's got all your powder charge on the back side, with a little band around the front there. And some of them came with a little deal on the front there you could break open and pull out the fuse. The fuse was like a piece of rope with a bunch of little marks in it. The cannoneer knew how long that fuse had to be to burn a certain length of time. So if that was an aerial shot, you would know that when the cannon went off, when the cannon fired, it would light that fuse at the same time, and it would be burning as it flew. At a certain point that it would ignite the charge that was inside of that ball, and then it would explode in the air, which is pretty devastating. And the package now, if you see the 6 men that are on a cannon crew, one of them's got a ramp. So you want to make sure when that thing goes down the barrel that it comes in there darn hard. If nothing else, even to break that package, but even if it doesn't break the package, there's another guy sitting there with a spike and hammer. And he drives the spike through this hole in the back of the cannon to poke a hole in that package. Another guy has a fuse standing there, it's smoking, ready. It's not actually a fuse like punk. And he drops a little fuse in that hole that just got poked, and he lights it, and of course the cannon goes off and blows that shell out. And if you're lucky, it explodes where you want it to, which is exactly what happened to Shurly, because he said they knocked down a whole bunch of Indians that were planning to charge the train. So they did an aerial shot, and he said we used what did he use? Round ball shot. Now it wasn't this cannonball. It probably had like a giant shotgun. Well, I've seen those. It would be a whole package of balls anywhere from the size of a plum down to a walnut, and there'd be a lot of those in there. So it'd be like a giant shotgun, basically.
Grape shot, that's what you
Grape shot. Mm-hmm. So the thing is that sabot, if you saw another guy standing there, something looked like a big Q-tip, okay, and he dips it in a bucket of water, and you think he's cleaning the barrel out. A lot of times there's pieces of that sabot that are still burning in there. Ooh, you don't want to shovel a lot of ground down in there and have that butter go off. You want to make sure that it's out, so you shove this wet swab down inside there and pull it back out and make sure there aren't any burning pieces back in your cannon, because while you're loading it, you don't want the next round to go off. And so, having been in the artillery, I know how this stuff works. I got to shoot one of those cannons. It's like down there in front of the armory right now. It's 155. And if you're standing behind it, the shell is big enough that you can actually see it go away. It's just like a black dot that gets smaller and smaller. And I need to tell you that these movies that you see, Hollywood doesn't do us any justice. These guys are going down the street in one of these World War II movies or whatever, and they hear, and somebody says, down, everybody gets down and the shell goes off. It don't work that way. The shell flies faster than the speed of sound. I have been on the observation post where you're the spotter and you tell the people back at the cannons where to shoot. And you're watching out there in the impact area, and the first thing you see is a flash in the air, and the ground just goes like that everywhere. There's 1,000 pieces of this metal. The concussion hits you about that time, and then you hear it like that, and if you wait a few seconds, you can hear the cannon back there, a couple, 3 miles or whatever else go off. So it's all backwards from the way, when that shell goes off, it's too late. You just need to find a place in case the first one didn't get you. You don't want to have your head sticking up when the second one comes along. So the artillery is interesting. Can I tell you a little anecdote about a thing that happened with the gun we were, one of the guns in the line of firing battery. Training a new crew, and two guys walk up there with a projectile. These projectors weigh 98 pounds. That's a pretty good sized shell. And each guy's got the plate, and they walk up to the back of the gun, and they set it down there. And here's this projectile on this piece of iron plate. Two guys back there with a ram, and the officer says, "Ready, ram." And you're supposed to ram on command. So we're watching this crew, and the guy says, "Ready," and one guy pushed it, and the guy thought, maybe I got pushed you. And the shell only went part way into the can. This thing's got a 2-pound TNT fuse on the end of the shell, so it weighs an even 100 pounds. It's easy to calculate. So they have to crank the gun down, and the guy gets out there in front. He's got something he reaches down in the barrel with. It's like a clinker grabber, and he grabs a hold of the detonator, and he gets up there, and he unscrews the detonator, and brings it out of the barrel, and they take it off this thing. And here's this other guy going back there, and he's got 2 pounds of TNT in his hand. He's not sure whether this was one that was supposed to go off in the air or on his back. And he's got to do something safe with it, so he's walking around with this thing and hanging on to it while this guy gets this other piece of stuff he's got to pull the knob on it. He reaches down there, he hits the shell, and he goes, "Did it move?" And the guys in the back are looking, and they go, "No," because the thing is, you've got to seat the shell in the gun to put it powder in behind it that comes in little sacks. And so he gets back and he smacks the shell again. He says, "Did it move?" And the guys in the back says, "No, hit it harder." And he rears back, and just perfect timing, the gun next to him went off. He smacked that shell, and the gun next to him went off. He just fell on the ground, and we watched him the rest of the day. He was walking around. So, yeah, serious stuff, but it can be funny at times. And the whole crew, in case you didn't know, when they get ready to fire, everybody turns away from the gun, puts your hands over their ears, and opens their mouths. That's the way you save your eardrums. Okay, more questions about Mr. Shurly.
What side of the creek was they on to cross?
They were on the west side of Prairie Dog Creek, and I might mention that after they broke up camp and were taking the wagons on to Fort C.F. Smith, they would stay on the west side of the creek until they got right opposite of where Sheridan is now, and came right over the hill where 5th Street is now. And right on out past the hospital, right out Soldier Creek, and right past Manchester and Dayton, where they would again join the new road, or the military cutoff, further on out over by Dayton, and continue on to Fort C.F. Smith. Foot soldiers were expected to walk at least 28 miles a day. It was probably a relief for those guys to just have to walk beside the oxen, because the oxen never trot, they don't run, they just walk and pull their wagon. And so that was probably a pretty easy duty for the foot soldiers compared to some of the marches that they had to do. And there was, Judy remembers another tale about some of these guys that had to leave Fort Phil Kearny, walk to Laramie, and walk back. I mean, in army shoes. Do you know what they're like? The stuff those guys had? There was no left or right. There was just an army shoe. Unbelievable. I don't know how they, didn't end up with foot problems or anything else. Probably wore 3 pairs of socks. I don't know.
So our museum is on the military cutoff. It was Glenn who decided that this Bozeman Trail that our museum is on, that it is the military cutoff road.
Yep.
Oh.
Went through Beckton and on out that way.
Yeah,
And
they tried to stay up high on the,
Yep.
the foothills.
It was advantageous for them to do that because they were on horseback and they could stay up high and, you know, weren't surprised as readily as the people who were down along these other areas. Keep in mind, when people moved into this area, most of the grass was probably as high as its table or better. And these Indians could hide out there pretty darn easy. You know, just because you're out on the prairie doesn't mean you can't see them. And that's probably why Fetterman was surprised when the ground suddenly sprouted feathers.
You know, the other thing, just to remind you, it wasn't just a designated road, because the Bozeman Trail probably passed numerous places wherever they could go across, because, you know, in June we have a lot of flooding, so they would go where they could cross. And so here in Bighorn, there could have been a crossing right here by the Women's Club, but there was also one over by the Powderhorn.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Sheridan, they crossed the Goose Creek in numerous places. So it's not just one road on the hills coming over. It depended on the rain and the feed.
Mhm.
They'd go where the feed was.
I know exactly where the Rock Creek, Fort Custer stage route crossed Goose Creek north of town, because my grandfather on my mother's side owned that property right there where the old check station used to be, right on the north side of the creek
Oh,
there.
yeah, where it was
And there was
low.
a stage barn, and the stagecoach could drive in and change horses and drive out the other side of it. That's the stage barn there. So, I don't know how many years they used that Rock Creek to Fort Custer stage route, but it couldn't have lasted more than, what, 5 or 6 years? Maybe.
Good question, I don't know.
The railroad kind of
They would have taken it.
put those guys out of business, but freight used to come to Sheridan from Miles City, because that's where the almost the terminus for the railroad for a long time. And that was actually shorter, and they would have followed the route of the planned north-south railroad, the Wyoming Railway, which is all of the fill and cuts were completed all the way up from Douglas, I believe, clear on up to Miles City, right through the reservation. There's remnants of that you can see, even down by Lake Desmet and everything. But as far as that railroad ever got was to Midwest. It got shut off right about the time of the Teapot Dome scandal.
Yeah, it didn't go all the way through.
That's another story.
Another
For
story,
time.
yeah.
Any more questions?
Mike, has there been any try or to make a marker or do something to show where the Shurly fight is?
Glenn talked to, that was another thing that he mentioned. He got a lot of his information from John Stanton Timber. And apparently John didn't know that spot because Glenn didn't mention that John knew about that particular battle, but he did know about another one that took place further on that Prairie Dog Creek between the Crows and the Sioux.
Can you show that on that map?
Well, let's see.
Maybe the next one you can show,
Let's
it's-
see.
like, right at the bottom above that 1 mile marker where those conicals are.
Okay. Shurly Bite.
Right, yeah,
Right
maybe
up-
there. in this-
Yeah, there's a couple of conical hills.
Right.
Yeah, right in here. I'm sorry. It's a couple of conical hills. The Crows were on top of the hills, and the Sioux had them surrounded, according to Stanton Timber. And they were in there for about 3 days before more Crows came and ran the Sioux off. And so there probably was a lot of, I think probably at that time, and they were using bows and arrows. I don't think anybody had many firearms at that time. And that's the other thing that was pretty evident in the Shurly fight. Most of the Indians there were still using arrows. They're wanting to get in close, and soldiers were keeping them at bay. So, and that's why they were raining arrows that had two-pronged purpose there, keep the livestock all stirred up. You know, imagine if somebody dropped an arrow onto your ox's back, you probably wouldn't like that very much. So,
Did Glenn's stuff get cataloged in?
Yeah, it's at the
way?
Wyoming room. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. But you've got a good question, Mona, and maybe Carrie and we all could probably work on this. There are lots of places that need to be marked. And with the Bozeman Trail project that Dave McKee is doing, and Joanne Puckett with Fort Phil Kearny, this would probably be one that should be marked on that historic trail. And like this other fight that he's talking about, we have a lot of work here to do. We've never even marked the Opehanna Cabin site, which really should be on the National Register, or at least be recognized by the local historic committee that's
Even
just
after we
reviewed.
put up the stuff?
Yeah, it's not designated as a historic site.
What do you have to do to get that
Oh,
done?
there's a lot of paperwork you have to do.
It's an application and it goes through the state review board and then it goes to the National Park Service to go on the National Registry of Historical
It
Sites.
takes about 2 years to do that. It's a long process.
But it's not gonna happen unless we start it.
That's right. Yeah. And in Bighorn, our museum is not on the National Register. The only buildings in Bighorn that I know of, the Merc, I always call it the Bozeman Trail Inn, the bar, and then is it Christy Love's house right here? Yeah, I think those are the only three. It's like the historic district of Bighorn, but she didn't put the museum on it. And it was Christy Love who did it. She took a long time to get that processed and in. I think the Wallachs are trying to do the Congregational Church, the brick church. They've been working on that for a long time.
I've seen a presentation, yes,
Kay
Kay
Wallach.
presented to the Sheridan County Historic Commission. She wants it to be a community building, yes.
Yeah.
However, we don't have to, if we wanted to put signage up about this fight site, this battle site, we don't have to put it on the National Historic Register in order to put signage up, correct?
Correct.
So we
Correct.
could work on that aspect of it just ourselves.
You could, and the problem, I guess it's not really a problem, it's just trying to find the land to put it. So, because I bet it's a really complicated thing to put it on a state highway. Maybe the county road there at Cat Creek you could, but you'd have to get permission from a
Well, from the
landowner
local
or
owners,
somebody
yeah,
to
yeah.
put up a
But once
sign.
again, as Mona said, if you don't start, it's not gonna get done. So,
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
And in this kind of instance, you'd want it so that it's sort of recognized as a historic site and not just an odd sign here and an odd sign there. So
Well,
you'd
we may
have to organize.
Start with the odd sign here.
You might
and
have
then go
to.
from there.
You might have to. Yeah.
And occasionally something happens, just like a couple of weeks ago with the program that Carrie saw, or was instrumental in getting to us of the photograph.
Oh, Jessamine
Jessamine
Spears.
Spears.
Yeah, Jasmine Spears photographs and everything. Well, one of those showed the Johnson, it was called Johnson Mansion there at Kirby. I had some photographs of that. It's better than, well, it was still up. That house was every bit as significant as the Kendrick Mansion.
Exactly.
And I even went over there and took a contractor out, do an estimate on what it would take to bring that thing up to usable quality, and maybe you turn it into your bed and breakfast, and asked Walt Taylor, who owned it at the time, if, you know, we could do that, lease it, or do something and put it on the historical register, and he'd get a tax credit for having that listed on the National Historic. I don't know if we want to do that or not. About a month later, somebody was knocking the walls down for the rocks that were in it.
Yeah. It was destroyed, and it was really sad. It was a huge, gorgeous old mansion. Yeah. Yep.
So, there you go.
There you have it.
Yes.
Well, if there are no other questions,
sir.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Enjoy and drive carefully, and what a beautiful day.
Thank you, Mike.